I came across Arrowhead while trying to find out about cases of death caused by the drug Adderall. I am not submitting this report to scare anybody, but rather make people think twice before abusing this medication. It is very hard for me to write this because I am still getting over the loss of my brother Tim. Adderall is the answer to a lot of people who struggle with learning or have behavior or attention problems. It is, for the most part, safe and effective if used properly. If not used properly, you may end up like my dear brother. I will make my statement as quick as I can. Tim was supposed to graduate this year, 2003, but an event changed that forever on a day I will never forget. Tim had been prescribed 40 milligrams of Adderall daily. He was in the process of increasing his dose because he felt as though he was getting tolerant to it. He made a terrible decision of increasing the dose on his own. Having been sick for a week, he had to make up 2 hard tests after school and then hurry to football practice. While nobody knows what he was thinking, we know by toxicology reports and counting the bottle of Adderall that Tim had taken between 100 to 120 milligrams of Adderall. He proceeded to football practice and collapsed during the beginning of a workout. Tim never woke up. His cause of death was a massive heart attack. There are 3 theories to this heart attack: heat, overdosage of Adderall, or a combination of both. That's all I need to say. Think twice before messing around with this stuff. My only wish was that Tim had read a report like the one I am submitting. Before I begin, I want to say that I notice many people are aware of the negative side effects of amphetamines from reading other experience reports. Although I will focus on that, this is not like the other reports. None of the other reports mention taking a drug that forces you to do things when you're locked inside a place where there's nothing to do. Yeah, I'm talking about jail. About 2 weeks before I was incarcerated, I was prescribed Adderall extended release from the same doctor who prescribed it to me 3 years earlier. I had not touched it in those years. I started at about 10 or 15 milligrams a day, and he worked me up to 60 milligrams a day over time. I hardly remember if it worked on me or not. I was in a horrible crisis at that time in my life. But that's beside the point. I wanted to get an edge on college because I just started 2 weeks prior to my doctor's visit, and I also remember the decreased appetite effect it has on me. I wanted to lose some weight from a very long summer of drinking and partying. He prescribed me 60 milligrams a day starting the following day, the same dosage I worked myself up to over those several months. I thought about it, but I wasn't concerned. The next day, I was eager to do it. I like speedy drugs, and everyone here calls Adderall poor man's coke or poor man's yayo. I popped the 2 orange capsules and then laid down to be lazy like usual. My girlfriend got up and started to get dressed and ready. I went for a short drive to a liquor store for something to drink and slightly started to feel the effects after about an hour. It's hard to notice unless I'm really paying attention, but it gradually came to full effect and I started to feel the typical symptoms, which were awesome to me. I felt good, confident, but not the take over the world feeling. Motivated, not hungry, energetic, and productive. I went back and reported my condition to my girlfriend adequately. "I'm so fucked up," I told her. I had told her what it would do, so she analyzed me for a while and voiced any change in me she had noticed. She said I couldn't sit there and do nothing. I was always cleaning, rearranging something, talking to someone, writing or asking questions. I felt as if all this time I have not been on Adderall. I've been so lazy, and now I had to accomplish all the things I should have or never did. I called my dad and corrected all the problems I was having with him at the time. I wrote a letter to my probation officer telling him I want to turn over a new leaf and not fuck up anymore. I cleaned, I shopped, I organized, and I talked. I was finally a productive citizen. 5 days after this day, I was arrested at the local courthouse for a probation violation that occurred before my Adderall prescription. I would be in jail for the next 18 days. I thought to myself, at least I have my Adderall here. But I didn't make the connection that this drug makes me want to do things, and I'm in a place where I literally can do nothing. I was in a small 6-man cell for all these days. It was about 15 by 20 feet. I shared it with 5 other fellow criminals. I was completely unaware of the side effects Adderall can cause, but these side effects are extremely amplified when I'm forced to be separated from the world. And let me tell you, it was terrifying. My parents were in Mexico for several months on vacation and could not visit me, call me, or send me money. My brother came to visit me to tell me I'd lost my car, job, all my money, and all my belongings from my dorm room. Also, my bank account got closed, my parents wanted to disown me, and when I am released at 4 a.m. into the cold snowy night on my release date, I will be homeless and only have a t-shirt. This is true, all those things were happening on the outside. But Adderall can cause anxiety and paranoia, sometimes terrifying a person of social interaction or cause them to dread things they normally would not obsess over. Well, what happens when you're already anxious, paranoid, depressed, and terrified of the what if? Disaster. When I was told all this, I started to shake, harder and harder as I stood in the visiting booth. My mouth went dry, completely devoid of all moisture. I felt as if my stomach was tied into knots and that all hope was lost. I had a yearning to start putting everything back together, but I was trapped in jail. Back in my cell, I obsessed over that day's visit. With so much spare time and nothing to do besides write, draw, or watch city TV, I had plenty of time to overanalyze the situation. Is my girlfriend gone? She must be cheating on me. Everything is gone. I'll starve to death with no money or home. My parents never loved me. Everyone forgot about me. I'll never be able to go to college again. I even had a day where I was terrified the computers at the jail would be wrong and showed that I had to serve a year instead of 18 days. It was insane. One night, I was dizzy and felt very strange, especially when I stood up. I was resting, yet noticed my heart was unbelievably fast. I ended up blacking out and collapsing. My cellmates pushed the panic button, and I was taken to see a corrections officer as there was no nurse on duty. My blood pressure was completely fucked, and my heart rate was 180 beats per minute. The corrections officer freaks out, but is unable to send me to the hospital unless I am in the act of dying, or so they say. I was then placed in medical watch for several hours. Following that day, I saw a doctor and they told me I was in trouble. I had lost 20 pounds in 12 days. I weighed 178.5 pounds before incarceration. I was then at 158.5 exactly. After some tests, I was lacking nutrients, vitamins, and other healthy protein levels. I was malnourished. My skin was red, dry, and scaly. I already have a skin condition, but it made it worse. It spread all over my body, and jail doesn't help that either. My heart rate was still too high, but not bad. She said I could have gone into cardiac arrest or had a stroke. From that day until my release, things got really bad, but sometimes they were okay. A letter from my girlfriend, who had not left me, my brother assumed she did, helped to ease the anxiety attacks and depression. I was released and it took 2 days of my girlfriend nursing me back to normal for me to see reality. When she picked me up from jail, I was shaking and my heart raced when I spoke to her. I felt nervous around her, as if she was judging me or looking at me funny, and I still believed my world was crashing down around me. It has been 17 days since I've been released from jail. I have fixed my problems, but I still notice things are different since I've taken the drug. There are times when I feel slight social anxiety, and since I've been on the drug, I've had more problems with my girlfriend than usual. But that may or may not be from using Adderall. First off, I should say I have a prescription for Adderall, but I never took it until this day. I woke up at about 6:30 a.m., groggy and tired as usual, and got ready for school. Out of the blue, I decided it would be a good idea to try my prescription for Adderall. It had been prescribed 2 years prior. I wanted to take it since I had been struggling to concentrate at school. I found the pill box empty and remembered that I had refused to take them before and flushed them down the toilet. It had expired a couple months back anyway. My little brother also has a prescription for Adderall, so I decided I would just take his. He actually used his. I read the label, and it said take 2 in the morning, so I figured I'd take twice that since I weighed almost exactly twice as much as him. I took them at about 6:45 a.m., and about 10 minutes later, my mouth was extremely dry, I felt out of breath, and I got the chills. I wasn't bothered by this at all, but suddenly, a friend of mine, M, had wanted me to give her some pills so she could focus at school too. I put 20 in a Ziploc bag and got a ride for my carpool to school shortly after. I met up with M at about 7:30 and gave her the pills. School started 15 minutes later, and I went to first period where I sat next to her. My first period was a joke, so we just talked instead of actually listening. During our conversation, she brought up that you can get high if you take more than you're supposed to. She ended up giving me 10 of the pills and keeping 10 for herself. Midway through the first period at about 8:30, we both went to the bathroom and popped 10 pills each. The original symptoms I had earlier came back with one additional effect. My hands started shaking like you do when you get the shivers. I thought nothing of it and continued on with school. By 10:30, lunch had started, and eating was the last thing I wanted to do. I felt too weak to walk around, so I laid down by my next class, waiting and breathing heavily. An hour later, I was in third period, and I started to get uncontrollable tremors. As I was sitting down, my legs would shake violently, and my Japanese teacher asked if I was sick and told me I could try to sleep in the back of the room until I felt better. 90 minutes passed, and I was still shaking uncontrollably. My hands turned blue, and I could not move or even feel them. At this point, I was a little worried, just because everyone around me was so concerned and seemed so freaked out by my condition. I slowly walked to my next class, letting everyone feel my hands on the way. They were very cold, and I still couldn't move them. At the beginning of fourth period, some of my friends convinced me to talk to my teacher because my arm was blue up to my elbow, and I still could not move my hands. The feeling was like I forgot how to move them. It felt exactly like when I had a heat stroke a couple years earlier, and I forgot how to use my whole body from the neck down. Learning how to walk again was a bitch, but thanks to intense physical therapy, I was back to normal within a few months, even when doctors had told me I would never be able to walk again. Anyways, back to my story. I went to the nurse's office where she took my pulse and temperature. My heart was racing, and my temperature was a little above normal, but I felt freezing. They asked me if I had taken any medicine, and I told them I had taken Adderall for the first time, but I had a prescription and that I thought I was just having an allergic reaction to it. They called my aunt, who picked me up around 2:20 p.m. At this point, I was still having tremors, my arms were still blue, my stomach still hurt, and my legs could barely hold up my weight. My aunt drove me home first so I could show my doctor exactly what I took. I knew it was illegal to take someone else's prescription, so once I got home, I said I couldn't find it. She bought it, and we left to go to the hospital. During the time I was in the car, I threw up about 10 times. This is the worst I've ever felt in my life. Once I got to the hospital, the doctor ran all the normal tests and pumped my stomach. I told the doctor how much I took, and he looked at me with surprise and said that the most he had ever prescribed someone to take was 2 pills a day. By far, the scariest part of the whole experience is when I had to give a UA and my goods had shrunk to an extremely small size. I was so worried it would never return back to normal, yet too embarrassed to ask my doctor if it would. I had to wait for the results of all the tests to come back before they let me leave. By the time I left, all the symptoms besides the dry mouth and stomachache had all pretty much disappeared. Later that night, I called M to find out she had also thrown up many times as well, but didn't have as bad of a reaction as I did. I asked my doctor about this later, and he said it probably had something to do with body fat. I am an athlete, and my body fat is only 5%. Both me and M did not eat or sleep for 4 days. She lost 15 pounds, and I lost 10 in that same time. It was a generally normal day at my high school. I bought 9 20-milligram extended releases from a friend of mine. I've done Adderall before, so I thought I knew what I was doing. It was approximately 2:30 to 3 p.m. when I took the first dose of the 4 pills. Nothing was affecting me by the next 30 minutes, so I decided to take 2 additional pills, and it started to hit me. I loved it. I had work to make up from school, which I knew would take me forever to do without Adderall to help me pay attention. 30 minutes to an hour later, the effects started to wear off, so I downed the remaining 3 with some water. Fast forwarding to 2 a.m., none of the 3 I had taken hours before had affected me at all yet. Although I knew I was feeling the effect of the lack of sleep, I decided to listen to some music and let the time pass. Not 5 minutes later, I feel the beginning of the worst night of my life. My chest felt like it was being beaten from the inside. I ignored the feeling, but it kept gradually getting worse. I used my phone and took my BPM with a stopwatch. I was in the 180 to 200 range. By this time, I am shaking uncontrollably, hearing what sounded like TV fuzz, and I was so lightheaded, I almost passed out multiple times. I crawled my way into the bathroom because my muscles felt limp. I turned on the light and noticed my dark purple fingers and feet. I knew for sure this was going to be the end of me. I pled with a God I didn't believe in. My mother found me on the floor passed out and took me to the hospital. There, the doctor took an EKG of my heart and said I was close to having a massive heart attack. He said if I didn't pass out, my heart wouldn't have calmed down. I am now diagnosed with atrial fibrillation and have to take heart medication for life.